we launch a new series on the legacy of female leadership in Africa.
The truth about Africa from Africans.
As you follow along, you will find that Africa has had a long history of diversity and inclusion before diversity and inclusion became a huge global topic. For decades, the achievements of leaders in European nations have been touted, analyzed, and reanalyzed, often overshadowing the remarkable history of female leadership in Africa. The truth is, long before women's rights, diversity, and inclusion became focal points of global discourse, African societies had already embraced the leadership of women in governance, military strategy, and diplomacy. The African continent has produced powerful female leaders and warriors for centuries, championing women's rights in ways that were unheard of in many other parts of the world. To put this fact in sharp contrast, a look at ancient European history reveals notable female leaders such as Joan of Arc, who reigned from 1412 to 1431, and Queen Elizabeth I, 1533 to 1603, to Catherine the Great, 1729 to 1796, and Queen Victoria, 1819 to 1901. While these figures left indelible marks on European history, Africa, during the same period and even further into the past, had an even richer tradition of female rule and leadership. Starting with ancient and pre-colonial Africa, in the parts that are currently known as Egypt, we had Queen Amenerinas of the 14th BC. She was a warrior queen who led Kushite resistance against Roman rule. And we had Queen Tawaseret, who reigned from 1191 to 1189 BCE as the Pharaoh of Egypt, the last ruler of the 19th dynasty. And we have Queen Nefertiti in the 14th century, who co-ruled Egypt alongside Akhenaten. And of course, Hatshepsut, who is well known and one of the most successful pharaohs who conducted extensive building projects in Egypt, and she reigned from 1479 to 1458. And lastly, the Pharaoh Queen, Subekneferu, who reigned from 1806 to 1802 BCE in Egypt. And then we move on to West Africa, where we had queens like Kahina in the 17th century, a Berber warrior queen who led the Berber resistance against Arab expansion in North Africa. And we have Queen Yenenga in the 12th century in what's currently Burkina Faso and Ghana area. She was a warrior princess considered the mother of the Mossi people. And of course there is Amina of Zazu, or Zaria, who reigned in the 16th century in parts of modern-day Nigeria, and she was a warrior queen who expanded the Hausa state of Zazu. And we moved to Central and Southern Africa, where we had Queen Nzinga Mbande, the queen of the Ndongo and Matamba people who fought against Portuguese colonization. She reigned from 1583 to 1663 in what is modern-day Angola area. And then we have Queen Ranavalona I of Madagascar. She resisted European colonization, and she reigned from 1778 to 1861 in modern-day Madagascar. And of course, Queen Ranavalona III, also of Madagascar. She was the last ruling queen before Madagascar was annexed by France. She reigned from 1861 to 1917. Despite the deep-rooted tradition of female leadership, the colonial period saw a stark shift. Male-dominated European rule disrupted the power structures that had allowed African women to ascend to leadership roles. The 19th and early 20th centuries saw the erosion of female-led governance, as colonial administrators often imposed patriarchal European systems that marginalized African women from leadership and political influence. However, this did not mean the end of powerful African women in leadership. Instead, they adapted to new forms of resistance, activism, and governance, such as Nehande Nyaka Sikana. From 1863 to 1898, she was from Zimbabwe and led a resistance movement against British rule. And Fumilayo Ransom Kuti, 1900 to 1978, who in Nigeria played a critical role in advocating for women's rights and political inclusion. Additionally, is the well-known Aba Women's Riot of 1929 in Nigeria, which saw thousands of Igbo women rise against colonial rule. Women such as Ikonia, Nwanadia, and Nwongo led these protests, challenging unfair taxation and colonial oppression. Post-colonial Africa has seen the rise of modern female leaders. As African nations gained independence in the mid to late 20th century, women once again began to reclaim their place in leadership. Many African nations saw their first female heads of state and government in the post-colonial era. Among the first to break the glass ceiling was Elizabeth Domitian, who became the first woman ever to lead an African nation as Prime Minister of the Central African Republic from 1975 to 1976. She was followed by leaders like Agathe Uwilingiyimana, who served as Rwanda's Prime Minister from July 1993 until her unfortunate tragic assassination in 1994 during the Rwandan genocide. Other notable female leaders include Aminata Touré, who held office as Prime Minister of Senegal from September 2013 to July 2014. One of the most celebrated modern African leaders is Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who made history as the first elected female president in Africa, serving Liberia from 2006 to 2018. Her tenure not only marked a significant shift in African politics, but also served as an inspiration for women worldwide. Other modern female African leaders include Joyce Banda of Malawi, who was president from 2012 to 2014, Amina Gurib Fakim of Mauritius, who was president from 2015 to 2018, Sel Work Zwedi, who is currently the Ethiopian president, starting her tenure in 2018, and Samia Suluhu Hassan, currently the Tanzanian president, who started her leadership in 2021. The legacy of female leadership in Africa is vast and undeniable. Long before gender equality became a global discussion, African societies had already demonstrated their acceptance of female rulers, warriors, and strategists. The colonial era may have disrupted this tradition, but post-colonial African nations have steadily been reclaiming their history of strong female governance. Today, as the world pushes for greater gender inclusion in leadership, Africa stands as a testament to the fact that women have always had a seat at the table and often the throne. Join us as we continue to explore this rich history of female leadership in the African continent. Like, share, and subscribe to stay tuned for our in-depth series on the forgotten queens and warriors of Africa, as well as the modern women breaking barriers in leadership today. Sobekneferu, last pharaoh of the 12th dynasty. Very little is known of her, and for over 3,800 years, her story was buried under sand, swallowed by silence, lost to time, erased from memory. The echo of her name faded as centuries passed, her achievements obscured, her image forgotten. The year is 1806 BC. The Middle Kingdom is flourishing, an era of revival, architecture, and ambition. Egypt's heart beats strong. The temples of Karnak rise towards the heavens. The Nile flows thick and steady, nourishing the black land, Kemet, from which life is born. But in the royal city of Ishtawa, beneath the golden banners and limestone walls, the storm brews behind the throne. Sobekneferu, meaning the beauty of Sobek, was born into the divine bloodline of the 12th dynasty. A lineage of power, intellect, and sacred duty. She was the daughter of Pharaoh Amenemhat III, a master builder, a god king, and one of Egypt's greatest rulers. His vast irrigation projects fed millions. His architectural marvels reshaped the landscape. From her earliest years, Subekneferu walked the halls of governance. She absorbed the pulse of the empire, diplomacy, theology, mathematics, language, arts. She wasn't just royal by birth, she was brilliant by nature. And though she lived in a world where kingship was a man's inheritance, she learned what kings must know, how empires live and how they fall. She was never meant to rule. Their future was promised to her brother Amenemhat IV, her likely co-regent. His reign, though legitimate, was brief and faint in history's memory. He died young, no sons, no heirs, no clear successor. The throne stood empty. The kingdom stood vulnerable. A power vacuum yawned at the center of Egypt's might. And in that silence, Sobek-Neferu stepped forward, not as regent, not as consort, not as proxy, but as pharaoh. She laid claim to the crook and flail. The Ural serpent adorned her brow. The double crown sat upon her head. She didn't ask to rule, she declared it. She became pharaoh in her own right. And Egypt, for the first time in recorded history, had a woman as its supreme ruler. Unlike Tawaseret, who became pharaoh regent after the death of her husband and appears to have co-reigned with Siptah, Sobek-Neferu was not regent. She was pharaoh and reigned supreme alone. Sobek-Neferu's ascension to the throne was radical, but not without strategy. In a world where kingship was sacred and male-coded, Sobek-Neferu aligned herself with the divine. She invoked Sobek, the crocodile god of strength, protection, fertility, and kingship. Her very name invoked his power, Neferu of Sobek, an identity both political and spiritual. She did not simply step into the role, she transformed it. The priests whispered, the generals doubted, the courtiers clung to the past. Could Egypt survive the reign of a woman? Sobek-Neferu answered them, not with swords, but with symbols, not with conquest, but with clarity. She took the fivefold titulary, the full royal titulature used by pharaohs to legitimize their rule. She adorned herself with male regalia, the false beard, the Nim's headdress, the traditional royal kilt. Yet she did not hide her womanhood. She fused it with power. She redefined what it meant to be pharaoh. Her reign lasted only 4 years, but within that short time, Sobek-Neferu stabilized a kingdom on the brink of dynastic rupture. She governed not with brute force, but with institutional wisdom. Her lineage as daughter of Amenemhat III lent her immense legitimacy. She referenced him often in her inscriptions, a deliberate invocation of continuity and order. In a society rooted in divine order, Ma'at, her leadership ensured that balance was preserved, and in doing so, she carved a new path for women, for rulers, and for African sovereignty. Sobek-Neferu grew up immersed in the sacred traditions of the Nile Valley, the cradle of one of the world's most sophisticated civilizations. Her African identity was not incidental, it was foundational. She was part of an indigenous black dynasty, part of a heritage rich in intellect, ritual, and rule. Her reign disrupts tired Eurocentric narratives that frame Egypt as a distant offshoot of Asia or Europe. It was Africa. She was Africa. Her leadership was not an anomaly. It was a return to principle. She expanded upon the architectural works of her father, including the labyrinth at Hawara, a sprawling mortuary complex near the Fayoum. This site, both a spiritual center and a marvel of engineering, symbolized Egypt's mastery of both earth and spirit. By continuing its construction, Sobek-Neferu honored Amenemhat III's legacy while asserting her own presence in the sacred landscape of kings. She restored temples, she sponsored festivals, she honored the gods. She strengthened Egypt not through conquest but through cohesion. No grand military campaigns are attributed to her, but perhaps that is her greatest legacy. She preserved Egypt's peace in a time that begged for chaos. And yet, when her reign ended, it ended without record. No tomb has been found, no clear cause of death. Silence returned. The 12th dynasty collapsed. The throne passed into instability. Later rulers seeking to reassert male dominance erased her name from the king's list. Her statues were broken. Her monuments were defaced. Her memory buried. Was it because she was a woman? Was it a political casualty? Or just time, grinding slowly, eroding all? We may never know, but now we remember. Sobek-Neferu is more than a historical footnote. She is a beacon, a blazing symbol of African womanhood, the shoulder on which other female leaders of Africa have stood, the autonomy and the rule that she carried. Her story reclaims the truth that black women have always held power, long before modern movements gave it a name. She wasn't the only one. The Kandeks of Kush, warrior queens of Nubia, ruled with pride and force. Queens like Amenarenas led armies. Makeda, queen of Sheba, governed vast lands. Egypt's own Hatshepsut and Cleopatra would follow Sobek-Neferu's precedent, but she was the first. Her rule reframes history. It challenges the idea that women in antiquity were mere shadows behind kings. It calls us to correct the record, to name the forgotten, to lift up the voices that time tried to silence. Sobek-Neferu stands as proof that Africa's history is deeper, richer, and more complex than colonial textbooks dare to admit. Her legacy is a call to scholars, to artists, to truth seekers, to reclaim what was lost and honor what was hidden. In just 4 years, she changed the story of what was possible in Egypt. She changed how kingship and gender was viewed. Long before Cleopatra, long before Hatshepsut, there was Sobek-Neferu, the first confirmed woman to wear the crown of Egypt and claim the title of pharaoh. Her legacy rewrites the story of power, of gender, and of Africa. She was not a footnote, she was a force. History, as written by the colonizers, tells us that female pharaohs were rare and women in Africa were subservient. But this is not true. In Africa, queens have always ruled, and female warriors and strategists were the norm. We just fell under the forced ignorance of colonization and forgot to remember. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. We continue our series on great African female leaders and how long before the concepts of diversity and inclusion took root in modern society, ancient Africa was a vibrant tapestry of powerful women who broke boundaries and defied societal norms. In the heart of ancient Egypt, amidst the shifting sands of time, a powerful figure emerged from the shadows of historical narrative, a woman who would defy the norms of her society and carve her own path as one of the few women to sit on the pharaoh throne. Her captivating story stands as a powerful testament to the resilience and leadership of women in a predominantly male-dominated era. As a ruler, she skillfully maneuvered through political turmoil, challenged entrenched gender roles, and forged a legacy that, despite efforts to diminish it by her successors, continues to resonate today. She remains an inspiring symbol of female empowerment in ancient African history, reminding us that women have long held the reins of power, courage, and influence. This is the tale of Tawasret, the last ruler of Egypt's 19th dynasty from 1191 to 1189 BCE, and one of the few women to rise to the esteemed title of Pharaoh. Tawaser's remarkable journey to the throne began as the great royal wife of Pharaoh Seti II, positioning her at the very heart of Egypt's vibrant political and religious landscape. When Seti II passed away, the throne fell to Septa, a young boy whose lineage sparks endless debates among historians. In an exciting twist of fate, Tower Saret stepped into the role of regent, wielding the power to rule Egypt on behalf of her young charge. This wasn't unusual in ancient Egypt. Royal women often took the reins for underage rulers, yet Tawaserra was not content to simply serve in a traditional regency. Her ambitions soared far beyond the expected, hinting at a thrilling drive for power that would change the course of history. When the young pharaoh Septa met an untimely end, a questionable end, a power vacuum ensued, and in marched Tawaserra. She seized the crown and declared herself pharaoh. It was a daring move in a land where political and religious power was heavily steeped in patriarchy. The title of pharaoh was typically reserved for men, closely linked to the mighty god Horus and the sacred concept of Ma'at, representing cosmic order. With flair and determination, she donned the full royal regalia, embraced the traditional male titles and symbols of power. By doing so, she didn't just claim her throne, she redefined what it meant to be a ruler in her time. It can be imagined that being so close to power and the workings of the kingdom, she realized that she was just as capable, if not men who stood to rise to the throne at that time. One can only imagine that she must have had witnessed firsthand the futility of the gods of Egypt and the fact that there was nothing there to fear except fear itself. This bold queen turned the norms on their head, proving that strength and leadership aren't confined to gender. Tawaserra's reign was nothing short of a dramatic saga filled with challenges that could rival any gripping historical tale. Late 19th dynasty Egypt was a time swirling with political intrigue, economic strife, and looming external threats. Tawaserra, a formidable figure, ascended to the throne amidst a tempest of dissent. Powerful factions within the royal court and the priesthood likely viewed her as a disruptor in the patriarchal world, creating a high-stakes game of survival and strategy. But don't let the political turbulence fool you. Tawaserra was no ordinary ruler. With her keen political acumen and unwavering determination, she carved out her place in history, navigating the treacherous waters of power for a captivating, albeit brief, reign. One of the standout highlights of Tawaserra's reign was her impressive building program, which showcased her vision and determination. Among her most remarkable projects was a magnificent mortuary temple in Thebes, crafted in collaboration with her husband Seti II. This architectural wonder not only paid homage to the gods but also set the stage for her legacy in the grand tapestry of Egyptian history. Although Ramesses III would later claim this site for himself, the temple's construction remains a testament to Tawaserra's devotion to traditional pharaonic duties. and her desire to leave a lasting mark on the world. Her name isn't just etched in stone, it appears on stelae and various artifacts scattered throughout Egypt, vividly illustrating her efforts to solidify her authority and inspire awe among her subjects. Tawasaret truly embodied the spirit of a ruler determined to carve her place in the annals of time. Tawasaret's reign may have been brief, but it was anything but ordinary. This remarkable female pharaoh carved her name into the annals of history, or at least she tried, because after her death, her story faced some serious challenges. Enter her successor, Sednachte, the founder of the 20th dynasty, who seemed determined to erase Tawasaret from memory. Her magnificent monuments were defaced. Her name mysteriously vanished from official records, and her entire reign was conveniently left out of a letter list of pharaohs. But why such a drastic move? In ancient Egypt, it wasn't unusual for rulers, especially women, to be sidelined if they were seen as illegitimate or if their reigns were tied to chaos. Tower Cyrus' situation reflects a wider societal discomfort with female pharaohs who often had to fight not just for recognition but for legitimacy in a world dominated by male counterparts. So even though Tawasaret's legacy faced a concerted effort to be forgotten, her story serves as a fascinating glimpse into the complexities of power, gender, and politics of memory in ancient Egypt. A tale of triumph and turmoil that reminds us how history can be written and rewritten. Tawasare's story is a fascinating tale that pulls back the curtain on the intricacies of gender and power in ancient societies. Imagine a female pharaoh stepping into a world dominated by men, boldly challenging the idea that leadership was solely theirs to claim. Her reign, though short and packed with challenges, shines a light on the incredible resilience and skill of women in positions of authority. Tawasaret not only navigated the complexities of her time, but also paved the way for future generations. From political intrigue to her remarkable perseverance, her journey is a thrilling reminder that history is filled with strong women who dared to defy the odds. In today's world, Tawasaret's legacy is an exciting counter to the common myth about gender roles in ancient Africa. Her remarkable story showcases that women in ancient Egypt and indeed across ancient Africa were far from being relegated to passive or subordinate positions. Instead, they had the power to rise to extraordinary heights, influencing history in dynamic and captivating ways. Tower Sarit invites us to rethink what we know about the past, revealing a vibrant tapestry of female leadership that is both inspiring and empowering. Tower Sarit's life and reign are a captivating saga that shines a light on the dynamics of power, gender, and legacy in ancient Egypt and really most of ancient Africa. As one of the rare women to wear the coveted crown of Pharaoh, she embodies the spirit of female empowerment and leadership in a world often intent on sidelining women. Her story defies modern assumptions about ancient societies and provides a historical backdrop to the ongoing struggle for gender equality. So let's celebrate Tower Sarit as we continue to explore the great women of ancient African societies and work our way into the present. Long before the modern world acknowledged the importance of female representation, Africa stood as a bastion of diverse leadership, nurturing remarkable women who led with strength, wisdom, and strategic acumen. Among these legendary figures, one name echoes through the centuries. Imagine a queen, fierce and unyielding, standing at the head of her warriors, her presence alone commanding both fear and admiration. A queen who did not merely rule from the safety of her palace but led her people into battle against one of the most formidable empires the world has ever known. She was more than a sovereign. She was a symbol of defiance, a beacon of resilience in the face of overwhelming odds. This is a story of Amanirenas, the warrior queen of Kush. Amanirenas, one of the most formidable rulers of the ancient kingdom of Kush, reigned from approximately 40 BCE to 10 BCE. Her rule marked a pivotal moment in the history of Kush, a civilization that thrived along the Nile River in what is now modern-day Sudan. Known for its towering pyramids, rich cultural heritage, and fierce warriors, Kush was a beacon of African power and sophistication. To fully appreciate Amanirenas' significance, it is essential to delve into the context of the Kingdom of Kush and the challenges she faced. Kush was a civilization with a history stretching back over a millennium, deeply intertwined with its northern neighbor, Egypt. The two kingdoms shared culture, religion, and political ties, with Kush even ruling Egypt during the 25th dynasty, that's about 747 to 656 BCE. By the time of Amanirenas' reign, Kush had established herself as a powerful and independent nation-state, renowned for its gold mines, iron production, and thriving trade networks. Its capital, Meroe, was a bustling metropolis and a center of innovation, where indigenous writing systems, arts, and architecture flourished. Kush was also unique in its tradition of powerful female rulers. The queens of Kush, known as Kandakes or Candaces, were not mere figureheads but active leaders who commanded armies, negotiated treaties, and governed with authority. Amanirenas was no exception. She ascended to power alongside her husband, King Teritekas, during a time of great uncertainty. The Roman Empire under Augustus had recently annexed Egypt in 30 BCE, bringing the might of Rome to Kush's doorstep. The Romans, confident in their military superiority, viewed Kush as a potential target for expansion, seeking to exploit its resources and secure their southern frontier. In 25 BCE, the Roman governor of Egypt, Aurelius Gallus, embarked on an ambitious campaign to expand Rome's influence deeper into the African continent. For the kingdom of Kush, this was not merely a territorial incursion, but an existential threat. The Romans, under the leadership of Emperor Augustus, had already conquered Egypt and was now eyeing Kush's wealth, resources, and strategic position along the Nile. However, what the Romans encountered was not a passive target, but a fierce and determined adversary in the form of Queen Amanirenas, a ruler whose courage, strategic brilliance, and unyielding spirit could make her one of Rome's greatest foes. Amanirenas understood the gravity of the Roman threat. When the Romans began to encroach on Kushite territories, Amanirenas did not wait for them to strike. Instead, she took the initiative, launching a daring preemptive strike against Roman forces in Egypt in 27 BCE. Leading an army of both men and women, she attacked the Roman garrison at Aswan, captured several towns, and even destroyed statues of Emperor Augustus, a symbolic act of defiance that sent a clear message: Kush would not be subdued. The Roman Empire, accustomed to overwhelming its enemies with sheer military might, was unprepared for the audacity and ferocity of Amanirenas' campaign. Her forces pushed deep into Roman-controlled Egypt, seizing key cities and inflicting significant losses on the Roman legions. The Kushites, renowned for their formidable warriors and mastery of the harsh desert terrain, demonstrated their military prowess in a stunning display of resistance. Amanirenas herself was at the forefront of the conflict, leading her troops with unparalleled courage. According to legend, she was injured in battle, losing one of her eyes. Yet, rather than allowing the setback to weaken her resolve, she turned it into a symbol of her unbreakable spirit. Some accounts even claim that she mocked the Romans by sending them a severed head, a Roman statue, an unmistakable declaration that Kush would never bow to Rome. The Romans, however, were not easily deterred. Under the command of General Petronius, they launched a massive counteroffensive, pushing the Kushite forces back and reclaiming lost territories. The war between Kush and Rome was brutal and protracted, with both sides suffering heavy losses. Yet Amanirenas was far from defeated. She regrouped her forces and employed guerrilla warfare tactics, leveraging her deep understanding of the desert landscape to outmaneuver and harass the Roman legions. The conflict dragged on for years, with neither side willing to back down. The Romans, unaccustomed to such sustained resistance from a female leader, were both frustrated and impressed by Amanirenas' tenacity. After years of relentless conflict and fierce resistance, the war between the Kingdom of Kush and the Roman Empire reached its climax around 21 BCE. The outcome was nothing short of extraordinary. A peace treaty that not only secured Kush's independence but also marked a rare and humbling moment for Rome. Under the leadership of Queen Amanirenas, the Kushites had achieved what few nations could claim. They had forced the Roman Empire, one of history's most formidable superpowers, to reconsider its expansionist ambitions and negotiate on terms that heavily favored Kush. This was not merely a military victory, it was a triumph of resilience, leadership, and strategic brilliance, cementing Amanirenas' legacy as one of the most extraordinary figures in African history. The terms of the treaty was astonishing, especially considering the disparity in power between the two nations. Rome, which had expected an easy conquest, agreed to withdraw its forces from Kushite territory, abandon its claims to the disputed regions, and exempt Kush from paying tribute. These concessions were a clear acknowledgement of Amanirenas' success in defending her kingdom's sovereignty. For Rome, an empire accustomed to dictating terms to its adversaries, this was a rare and humbling moment. For Kush, it was a validation of its strength and a testament to the indomitable spirit of his people. The significance of Amanirenas' victory cannot be overstated. At a time when Rome was expanding its empire across 3 continents, she had managed to halt its advance and secure a future for her people on her own terms. It can even be said that the war between Rome and Kush may be the reason why Rome did not expand further into the continent of Africa. Amanirenas embodied the strength and resilience of the Kingdom of Kush, proving that courage, ingenuity, and determination could overcome even the most daunting challenges. Today, Amanirenas is celebrated as a symbol of African pride and empowerment. Her story is a reminder of the enduring power of leadership and the importance of defending one's sovereignty. The Kingdom of Kush, though often overshadowed by its more famous neighbor, Egypt, was a civilization of immense cultural and historical significance. Amanirenas, as one of its greatest rulers, played a crucial role in preserving its legacy and ensuring its place in the annals of history. Her triumph over Rome stands as a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the ability of visionary leaders to shape the course of history. Amanirenas' legacy continues to inspire, reminding us that even in the face of overwhelming odds, resilience and determination can prevail. While Amanirenas is best known for her military achievements, her contributions to the cultural and spiritual life of Kush were equally significant. Under her rule, the kingdom of Kush experienced a renaissance of art, architecture, and religious expression. Amanirenas oversaw the construction of temples and monuments that celebrated Kushite heritage and reinforced the kingdom's identity as a powerful and independent civilization. These structures were not merely symbols of wealth and power, but also served as centers of learning, worship, and community life. The temples, adorned with intricate carvings and inscriptions, reflected the sophistication of Kushite artistry and the deep spiritual connection between the people and their gods. Amanirenas' patronage of the art was a deliberate effort to strengthen the cultural fabric of her kingdom. In a time of external threats and internal challenges, she understood the importance of fostering a sense of unity and pride among her people. By investing in cultural projects, she ensured that Kushite traditions and values would endure for generations. Her reign was a testament to the idea that true leadership encompasses not only the protection of a nation's borders, but also the nurturing of its soul. Amanirenas' legacy is not confined to the ancient world. It resonates deeply with modern struggles for autonomy, leadership, and representation. Her story is a powerful reminder that the fight for freedom and self-determination is timeless. Amanirenas' story is a testament to the enduring power of leadership and the importance of defending one's sovereignty, culture, and identity. She challenges us to rethink history, to recognize the contributions of women and marginalized voices, and to draw inspiration from those who have defied the odds to create a better world. Queen Nzinga Mbande of the Mbundu people, 1583 to 1663. The year is 1520. The first Portuguese traders reached the borders of the Mbundu state of Ndongo, in what is now modern-day Angola, located in the west-central coast of southern Africa. At this time, the Portuguese engaged in regular trade involving resources from the African coast in exchange for mirrors and beads and other Portuguese novelty. However, in 1575, the Portuguese established Luanda, marking the formal beginning of the Portuguese slave trade near the Ndongo coast. This Portuguese establishment began to encroach on lands belonging to the Mbundu people in about 1617. A peace treaty between the Mbundus and the Portuguese was struck in 1622. This occurred prior to Nzinga becoming queen. At the request of her brother, she met with the Portuguese to negotiate peace. She was an adept negotiator. She formed a strategic alliance with Portugal in 1622. Facing attacks from rival African aggressors looking to capture people for the slave trade, Nzinga's pact with the Portuguese allowed her to fight enemy tribes, to enslave for Portugal in exchange for weapons, and an agreement that the Portuguese would cease slave raids on the Mbundu people. Contrary to past European historic narratives, the Africans in various parts of the continent had a pre-colonial system of government which rivaled any existing European system of government of the same era. And this was the case with the Mbundus. Nzinga, prior to becoming queen, did what any other political leader would do. She worked with the enemy, the Portuguese, based on their treaty, to protect her own people, which of course meant capturing slaves from rival African tribes to pacify the Portuguese in exchange for weapons. It is believed that in 1626, her brother, who was king at the time, committed suicide. It is believed that he committed suicide due to the constant pressure and upheaval from the Portuguese. The Portuguese did not uphold their end of the treaty, but they continued to encroach on Mbundu lands. Queen Nzinga ascended to the throne in 1626. By that time, Portugal had entirely broken its side of the deal. Nzinga refused to give in to the Portuguese without a fight. In 1627, she formed a temporary alliance with the Dutch, an enemy of the Portuguese, and led an army against them. At this time, the Portuguese were engaged fully in slave trade in parts of Africa, and they had extended their slave trading into Mbundu land. Through her leadership, Nzinga successfully held off the Portuguese forces for decades, personally leading her troops into battle, even while in her 60s. Despite multiple attempts by the Portuguese to capture Nzinga, they never succeeded. She died peacefully in her 80s after a long life of defending her people from colonial rule. Queen Nzinga of Mbundu is a controversial figure. She is a true politician who leveraged what she was dealt in the era in which she was queen to do the best for her people. By the late 1630s, Nzinga had expanded her influence to the north and south of Matambe. Using her forces, she cut other rulers off from the Portuguese-controlled coast. She captured the Guagongo River and bringing the region into her control, and she expanded the slave trade by stealing slaves from enemy African tribes and selling them to the Dutch and even sometimes to the Portuguese in exchange for favors. Thanks to Queen Nzinga, a lucrative slave trade was established. Using this large army of about 80,000 soldiers, she was able to secure the kingdom of Mbundu from 1641 to 1644. It also emboldened Queen Nzinga to go after other African kingdoms. For instance, she invaded the Wandu region of Congo, which was traditionally a long-standing enemy of the Mbundu people. They revolted against their Congolese king at said time, and Queen Nzinga, it is believed, used that opportunity to go against the region of Congo and to overcome them, and she instituted her leadership over those lands. Nzinga refused to withdraw from the region of Wandu. This greatly offended the Congolese king at the time, Garcia II. Queen Nzinga had grown so much in power, prestige, and military might, to the point that her former husband and ally, known as Kasenje, feared her growing power in the region and formed a coalition of Bangala leaders against Nzinga. He invaded her lands in Matambe, although he made little progress. Her growing power won her the support of many Ndongan nobles, and they flocked to her side, and she was able to collect tribute even in the form of slaves, which she in turn sold to the Dutch in exchange for firearms, thus increasing her military and economic power. By 1644, she considered Garcia II of Congo to be her only enemy or opponent in the region, while the Portuguese viewed her as the most potent adversary in Africa. It is so amazing. It is so amazing what Queen Nzinga was able to accomplish. She even had a spy network, which is believed was led by her sister Fungi. who was embedded with the Portuguese and would send inside plans to her sister, Queen Nzinga. As a matter of fact, history has it that in 1644, Nzinga defeated the Portuguese army at the Battle of Ngoleme, and it was based on the spy reporting of her sister Fungi. So this is way different from what most European historic writings have suggested, that African governments were illiterate, were not organized, they were small nation states. But we could see with Queen Nzinga, she was a politician through and through. Unlike her brother, who could not withstand the pressures of government, she took it on, and she went the whole, like we would say, the whole 9 yards with it. Even forming her own military, forming her own barracks, having a spy unit controlled or overseen by her sister Fungi, and very effective too in getting her the results that she needed for her military campaigns. Now we must add at this point that in 1646, the Portuguese did defeat Queen Nzinga in the Battle of Kavanga, and they captured her sister. Kambu was captured, and also her sister Fungi was captured. Unfortunately, her sisters, it is reported that the Portuguese drowned her in the Kwanzaa River. In retaliation, Queen Nzinga laid a siege on the Portuguese capital of Masangano. She isolated the Portuguese. History has it that she overcame them at the Battle of Kombi. Despite her successes, the people of Africa viewed Queen Nzinga as a controversial figure because of the way she engaged in the slave trade of the day. She benefited from the slave trade of the day. She played the Dutch against the Portuguese in favor of her people and her kingdom. And while this is true, it also speaks to the strength of this woman as a female leader. Way before the modern era, she was able to harness political strategy, military might, and diplomatic engagement to build her kingdom into such a huge spans of land and peoples. And she held the Portuguese at bay for her entire life. And she worked with the Dutch to maintain control over her territory and over the slave trade. It's amazing what she was able to accomplish. And as stated earlier, she died in her 80s quietly in her own home. Her story is so remarkable on how Angola became the nation it is today. It started with the military might and prowess of Queen Nzinga and Bende of the Mbundu people. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Queen Nanny of the Maroons. The story of Queen Nanny is remarkably different from all the other queens, pharaohs, and chieftainesses of Africa, because even though she was an Ashanti princess, she lived in enslaved Jamaican territories in the 1600s. Her reign and military prowess took place in the Blue Mountain region of Jamaica, where she led several military campaigns, successful campaigns I might add, against the British. We begin her story in Ashanti land, Africa, to establish her African heritage. Prince Naquan of Ashanti, of the royal house of Karamansi, was born in 1620. By the time of his birth and early teenage, Ashanti land was established with an ongoing successful business relationship with the whites. According, the Ashantis acted as middlemen in the copper trade in exchange for gold, silver, and precious minerals, which was brought from the hinterland for sale at the coast. Ashanti land, of course, was located on the Atlantic coast in what has now become or is now known as Ghana, and at one point was known as Ivory Coast by the British. Prince Nekwan of Ashanti started trading with the Spanish against the advice and counsel of his family. They believed the whites were treacherous by nature. Prince Nekwan traded gold in exchange for copper with the Spanish. Copper was stronger and was an efficient mineral in forging shields and swords, which the Ashanti needed for their wars. Gold, on the contrary, was soft and malleable and wasn't of much value to the Ashanti people. It is believed that in about 1640 BC, at the height of Prince Nekwan's business dealings with the Spanish offered to take him and his men to see the New World. Travel in those days was by ship across the Atlantic Ocean. It was agreed between Nekwan and the Spanish that they would build a copper trading outpost together in the New World. History has it that Prince Nekwan took 80 men with him and a huge store of gold on that voyage. While on the voyage, which lasted in the course of history, the Spaniards were conquered by the British in 1655. About 10 years after Prince Nekwan was abducted from his homeland in Ashanti. Prince Nekwan found himself switching from fighting the Spaniards to fighting the British. He unfortunately was killed in battle in 1690. That's about 4 years after Queen Nanny's birth. So Queen Nanny was born into a royal family of freedom fighters. She would have learned the art of war very early in life. She ended up leading the escapee slave community in the Blue Mountain region of Jamaica. They came to be known as the Windward Maroons. Queen Nanny successfully fought a guerrilla warfare against the British in the colony of Jamaica for years, beginning with what became known as the First Maroon War. The First Maroon War began in 1728, according to British accounts. By this time, Queen Nanny was 38 years old, and her wars against the British was to last 12 years, although this was unknown to either party at the time. Queen Nanny's mastery of guerrilla warfare made it impossible for the colonizers to defeat them in battle. Nanny's military prowess played an important role in their prolonged, successful resistance to British rule. The British had no choice but to sue for peace. They had suffered many losses, and the war had become unsustainable for the British. On April 20th, 1740, almost 300 years ago, a peace treaty was struck between the British and Queen Nanny. The treaty granted 500 acres of land to Nanny and her people and guaranteed their freedom. Queen Nanny was bred for war from birth. By a businessman/warrior prince father, she was indomitable and unyielding. Today, she's still the only female national hero of Jamaica, and her native Ghanaians view her as a figure of history and pride. She bears a strong connection to Ghanaians' own struggle against colonialism. The village built through that 500-acre land grant in the 1740 treaty still stands today. It is called Moortown, after the Ashanti town of Moree. Some call it New Nanny Town. Modern residents of Moortown in Jamaica still celebrate April 20th, 1740 as a victory holiday, and sometimes referred to as 420. And Queen Nanny's image is currently printed on the Jamaican dollar note, which is referred to as a nanny. So whether raised in Africa on the continent or raised in pseudo-slavery in Jamaica, Queen Nanny was destined to be a leader. Queen Nanny was destined to blaze a trail of female leadership from African roots. Think about it. In the 1600s, when all the Spaniards were men, if they were women, it would have been their spouses. All the British were men. If there were any women in their company, it would have been their spouses, maybe servants. Even the Arawak natives did not have female leaders, at least not known to history. But out of Africa, through slavery, her father's enslaved men, and she being born into that fight to be free from slavery, still Queen Nanny thrived, a female leader of African descent, of African roots. So Africa has always had that understanding that women had a place. Looking through the histories of Queen Nanny, the oral tradition and the oral history, there is no inkling of anybody being against her or her leadership because she was a woman. She had to be reckoned with. She could not be ignored. The British tried it for 12 years and failed. They had to give in to her. This is remarkable and a great testament to women today. Not to downplay the role of men, but rather to show that women have taken center stage in African history for millennia. Some history is lost, but the story of Queen Nanny is remarkable and needs to be celebrated. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. If all one read of African history was European accounts, one would walk away with the belief that Africa, prior to colonialism, consisted of people living in bands or groups or herds or families like wild animals. Such a reader would be oblivious to the nation states and kingdoms that existed on the African continent long before the British monarchy took shape. Those nation states were sophisticated with a strategized system of government, commercial hubs, military campaigns, conquering and being conquered by each other. The story of Queen Mother Yaa Asantewaa and the Ashanti Kingdom was one such kingdom. Yaa Asantewaa of Ashanti, 1840 to 1921. She takes the throne as Queen Regent after her son, who was chief, was exiled to Seychelles by the British colonizers. At the dawn of European colonialism, and just like her counterpart in other parts of Africa, she did her best to stem the tide of European invasion, much like the Native Americans in the 16th and 1700s. Colonialism spread like a plague and almost consumed the continent of Africa. But unlike Native Americans of what is now United States of America, the African spirit is indomitable and unyielding. We refuse to go quietly into the night of history, and that's why today Africa is still teeming with Africans in all their cultural, language, and cuisine diversity. Today, we focus on the story of Yaa Asantewaa of Ashanti, with the backdrop of this perspective in mind. Most historians and Europeans have referred to her as queen, but she was not a queen. The Ashanti Empire at the time was ruled by a conglomerate of chiefs who were rulers over various villages and communities which made up the Ashanti Kingdom. A case in point was Yaa's brother, Nana Akwazi Afren Opese, who was the chief of Edwesu, or in their language, the Edward Sehene of Edwesu. And as chief, he appointed Yaa to serve as Queen Mother under him. Yaa Asantewaa was born in 1840 As stated earlier, she was the queen mother of Edwesu in the Ashanti Empire, now part of modern-day Ghana. She's most remembered for leading the Ashanti military campaign against British colonialism in the 1900s. This is famously known as the War of the Golden Stool, also known as the Yaa Asantewaa's War. Yaa Asantewaa was the oldest of two children. Her brother, Afrain Opese, became the chief of Edwesu. After a quiet childhood, she became a farmer and cultivated crops on the lands around Buankara. She entered a polygamous marriage with a man from Kumasi with whom she had a daughter. During her brother's reign, Yaa Asantewaa saw the Ashanti Confederacy go through a series of events that threatened its future, including civil war from 1883 to 1888. When her brother died in 1894, Yaa Asantewaa used her right as Queen Mother to nominate her own grandson as Eju Swehene. When the British exiled him to the Seychelles in 1896, along with the King of Ashanti, Premfer I, and other members of the Ashanti government, Yaa Asantewaa became regent of the Ejisu-Juaben district. After the deportation of Premfer I, the British Governor-General of the Gold Coast, Frederick Hudson, demanded the Golden Stool, the symbol of the Ashanti nation. This request led to a series of secret meetings actually, of the remaining members of the Ashanti government at Kumasi to discuss how to secure the return of their king. There were disagreements among those present on how to go about this. Yaa Asantewaa, who was present at this meeting, stood and addressed the members of the council with these now famous words, quote, "How can a proud and brave people like the Ashanti sit back and look while white men took away their king and chiefs and humiliated them with a demand for the golden stool? The golden stool only means money to the white man. They have searched and dug everywhere for it. I shall not pay one proud one to the governor. If you, the chiefs of Ashanti, are going to behave like cowards and not fight, you should exchange your loincloths for my undergarments." End quote. History has it that Yaa Asantewaa, in proving her determination to go to war, seized a weapon at that moment. She seized a gun and fired a shot into the air in front of the men. On one occasion, she is quoted as saying, "Now I have seen that some of you fear to go forward to fight for our king. If it were in the days of the brave Osei Tutu, Okomfo Anokaye, and Opoku, where leaders would not sit down to see their king taken away without firing a shot. No white man could have dared to speak to a leader of the Ashanti in the way the governor spoke to you this morning. Is it true that the bravery of Ashanti is no more? I cannot believe it. It cannot be. I must say this. If you, the men of Ashanti, will not go forward, then we will. We, the women, will. I shall call upon my fellow women. We will fight the white man. We will fight till the last of us falls in the battlefields." End quote. The Ashanti male leadership did what men in Africa have done most of the time, to recognize when any person, be it a woman or a man, has the fire in their belly to lead the people to victory. Yaa Asantewaa was chosen by a number of regional Ashanti chiefs to be the war leader of the Ashanti fighting force. This is the first and only instance where a woman was given that role in Ashanti history. The Ashanti British War of the Golden Stool was led by Queen Mother Nana Ya Asentawa with an army of 5,000. Beginning in March 1900, the rebellion laid siege to the fort at Kumasi, where the British had sought refuge. The fort still stands today as the Kumasi Fort and Military Museum. After several months, the Gold Coast governor eventually sent a force of 1,400 men to quell the rebellion. During the fighting, Queen Ya Asentawa and 15 of her closest advisors were captured, and they too were sent into exile to the Seychelles. The rebellion represented the final war in the Anglo-Ashanti series of wars that lasted throughout the 19th century. On January 1st, 1902, the British fully seized the land that the Ashanti army had been defending. They seized it from them after they had held it for almost a century, and the Ashanti Empire was made a protectorate of the British Crown. Ya Asentawa died in exile in the Seychelles on October 17, 1921. 3 years after her death, in December of 1924, Prempeh I and the other remaining members of the exiled Ashanti court were allowed to return to Ashanti. Prempeh I made sure that the remains of Ya Asentawa and the other exiled Ashantis were returned for a proper royal burial. Ya Asentawa's dream for an Ashanti free of British rule was realized on March 6, 1957, when the Ashanti Protectorate gained independence as part of Ghana. Ghana was the first African nation in sub-Saharan Africa to achieve this feat. Ya Asentawa understood the ramifications of British occupation. She is seen by Ghanaians today as a queen mother who exercised her political and social clout to help defend her kingdom. The role she played in influencing the Ashanti men to battle the British was a function of her matriarchal status. The experience of seeing a woman serving as political and military head of an empire was foreign to British colonial troops in the 19th century. Ya Asentawa's call upon the women of the Ashanti Empire is based on the political obligations of Akan women and their respective roles in legislative and judicial processes. The hierarchy of male stools among the Akan, also known as the Ashanti people, was complemented by female counterparts who were responsible for looking after women affairs. Female stool occupants participated not only in the judicial and legislative processes, but also in the making and unmaking of war and the distribution of land. Ya Asentawa is today immortalized in songs with lyrics as follows. Ya Asentawa, the woman who fights before cannons, you have accomplished great things. You have done well. These songs are common in today's Ghana. The importance of encouraging more female leaders in Ghanaian society was highlighted by the establishment of the Ya Asentawa's Girls Secondary School at Kumasi in 1960. This establishment was funded from the Ghana Education Trust. In the year 2000, a week-long centennial celebration was held in Ghana to acknowledge Ya Asentawa's accomplishments. As part of these celebrations, a museum was dedicated to her at Kwaso in the Ejusijua Ben district on August 3, 2000. Unfortunately, a fire on July 23, 2004, destroyed several historical items, including her sandals and battle dress. The lineage of the Queen Mother in Ghana is still actively occupied and recognized today. The current Queen Mother of the Ashanti Kingdom is Nana Ama Konadu Yadom III. She is the eldest daughter of the late Nana Afia Kobi Sewa Ampem II and the 13th Asentehama, or Queen Mother, since Ya Asentawa. She was installed in 2017. Ya Asentawa died in the Seychelles in 1921. She was a successful farmer and mother. She was an intellectual, a politician, a human rights activist, a queen regent, and a leader. Ya Asentawa embodied the spirit of African women who have long held positions of power and influence. This was strange to Europeans, but very commonplace to the Ashantis and the African continent at large. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. And so far, to serve as Prime Minister in the Central African Republic and the fourth in the world to serve as Prime Minister as of 1976. At that time in Europe, only 3 other women held such a position. In the United States, women were still struggling to enforce their recently hard-won right to vote. But in Africa, a female leader rose to the political height of Prime Minister, the first in modern world history, except maybe Prime Minister Slovakia of Croatia in 1967. In her early years, Elizabeth Domitian received just enough grade school education, enough for her gender, typically sewing, cooking, and maintaining a home. Despite this, she was determined to carve a path for herself on her own terms. She went into agricultural subsistence and exportation. She became a reputable businesswoman. And in pre-colonial Africa, individuals with financial acumen became de facto community leaders due to their ability to directly change the livelihoods of people. Prime Minister Domitian was one such community leader. She swiveled from businesswoman to political leader during the Central African Republic's violent conflict for independence. She joined Barthélemy Boganda's fight for independence of the Central African Republic from colonialism. She mobilized and united various ethnic groups in a social movement which became known as Movement for the Social Evolution of Black Africa, or in French, MESAN. The social group later became a political party, and with the leadership of Jean Bidel Bokassa, Domitian was eventually appointed Prime Minister in 1975 and Vice President of the party. Bokassa was President. Domitian had an appreciation for agriculture and understood fully how it could empower women. Under her prime ministership, Central African Republic women thrived. Women were elected ministers for industry, finance and planning, and even the Department of Women's Issues and Commerce was initiated. Domitian appreciated democracy. Although she served as prime minister under Bokassa, a known dictator, she resolutely kicked against Jean Bokassa's bid to turn the country into a monarchy. This unfortunately led to her political demise. She was forced to resign as prime minister because her political views no longer lined up with President Bokassa's. By today's standard, Domitian would be considered illiterate due to the rudimentary education she received in the 1930s. She could not even speak French, which was considered the national language. She only spoke Sango. Those who interacted with her personally described her as showing extraordinary strength, in her eyes and authority in her voice. She also had a strong personality. She was enterprising and a skillful speaker. Even though she was illiterate, she taught herself arithmetic and was able to become a successful farmer, a businesswoman, and a politician. After she opposed Bokassa in his idea of making the Central African Republic a monarchy, her collaboration with him was over. She resigned as prime minister but maintained her position as then president of Mason. After Bokassa's overthrow in 1980, the new president of the Central African Republic was David Dacko. He had Domitian arrested and her properties confiscated and accused her of covering up extortions committed by Bokassa. In the midst of the upheaval, the turmoil, and the blame game, Domitian was convicted and imprisoned for 2 years. During this period, her husband disappeared. His whereabouts were never discovered. In 1993, when civilian President Angie Felix Patasse took power, she was compensated for some of the injustices that came with her resignation and later imprisonment. This was at a time when there were no pensions or privileges for political careers. Most people cast aspersions on Domitian's political career, especially because of her connection to Bokassa. She became the proverbial baby who got thrown out with the dirty bathwater. But she is probably the only illiterate woman in history who rose to prime minister. She achieved great strides in empowering women in the Central African Republic, even if it was done under a corrupt regime. She was a light in the darkness of Bokassa's presidency. She died in 2005 on April 26. She received a state funeral, which was held on May 10th, 2005. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Aminata Touré of Senegal was born when the republic was still shaking off the dust of colonial chains. It was a nation where power speaks French and corruption dons custom suits, a land filled with politicians where truth often fades behind closed doors. In this place of quiet storms and loud betrayals, Aminata Touré emerged not as someone waiting to be chosen, but as someone destined to challenge the very concept of power. She would not inherit a crown. She would carve her place with conviction. Her enemies would call her ruthless, and her allies called her relentless. This is not the story of a woman who played by the rules. It is the story of one who rewrote them. She didn't rise to power on charm or compromise. She rose with fire, and her name was whispered in fear by the corrupt and in hope by the voiceless. This is the story of Aminata Touré of Senegal. As we continue our series on the great women of Africa who were exercising their rights to shape their world long before women's rights was a thing, we'll delve deeper into the story of Aminata Touré. She was born in 1962, just 2 years after Senegal gained independence from France on August 20th, 1960. Aminata quietly began to forge her identity while the country celebrated its newfound status. Her father was a railroad mechanic, and her mother was a homemaker. Not exactly the pedigree of power, but in their small home in Dakar, the lessons were ancient and exacting. Dignity was earned, not bought. Justice wasn't theoretical, it was lived. And silence in the face of wrong was never an option. From an early age, Aminata displayed an insatiable curiosity, part scholar, part rebel. She didn't just memorize. She challenged, she questioned, she demanded better answers. Teachers remember her not just for being brilliant, but for being brave. She was a student who raised her hand not to recite, but to interrogate the logic of the lesson. She wasn't just learning for herself, she was sharpening her mind for a battle she hadn't yet defined. In a country where girls were often raised to be quiet wives, she was being shaped into something more dangerous, a woman with a mission. Her brilliance carried her beyond Senegal's borders to France, where she earned a master's in economics from the University of Burgundy, and later a doctorate in international financial management from the University of Aix-Marseille. But don't mistake her for a foreign-trained elite detached from her roots. In France, she witnessed firsthand the subtle racism of bureaucracy, the arrogance of foreign aid, and the coldness of institutions that claimed to care for the global South, but didn't. Her academic training was rigorous, but her real education came from observing these contradictions. She didn't study international finance to simply count money. She aimed to track where the stolen wealth went. She didn't pursue a PhD for prestige. She sought tools to expose the system's blueprint. At every turn, she chose the path of impact over comfort, and it showed. By her 30s, she was already consulting across Africa on justice reform and women's rights, collaborating with the United Nations Population Fund. In field offices from Côte d'Ivoire to Mali, she acted as a strategist, teaching young women how to fight back and helping communities seek justice on their own terms. She didn't wait for change from above. She organized it from below. By the early 2000s, Aminata Touré was not only well known in activist circles, she was also feared in bureaucratic ones. Her reputation as a no-nonsense reformer with an unshakable moral compass made her a natural ally and a formidable opponent. Then came the pivotal moment in 2012. Macky Sall won the presidency, defeating the long-ruling Adwalaye Wade. The nation was craving transparency, accountability, and reform. So Sall called on Touré not to advise from the sidelines but to enter the fray. He appointed her Minister of Justice. With this decision, Senegal's political elite felt the dynamics shift. Aminata was not interested in handshakes or photo ops. She came with a list, a plan, and the quiet fury of someone who has spent a lifetime witnessing injustice go unpunished. Before she became Prime Minister of Senegal, before she stood trial against powerful adversaries, and before she made enemies who could ruin careers and destroy reputations, Aminata Touré stood alone at the edge of a political system built to exclude people like her. Yet she didn't flinch. There are moments in politics when the air changes, when handshakes turn into courtroom summons, and campaign promises are no longer just poetry. This was the case in Senegal in 2012. Senegal did not just elect a new president, it elected a reckoning. When Macky Sall walked into the presidential palace, flanked by his team of loyal reformers, one figure cast a longer shadow than the rest, not because of her stature, but because of her intent. She was the one with the ledger, the names, and the courage to declare, quote, "No one is above the law, not anyone," end quote. Aminata Touré wasn't appointed justice minister to play politics. She was appointed to blow the doors off the vault, and that's exactly what she did. It didn't take long for Dakar to feel the heat. As Minister of Justice, Aminata was handed a portfolio that most would treat as a ceremonial baton. Instead, she wielded it like a blade. Her first order of business? Clean house. And not just metaphorically. She dusted off the long forgotten files of corruption cases, gathering cobwebs in locked drawers, files that other ministers pretended didn't exist. She ordered audits, launched investigations, and when she discovered that Senegal had lost billions to graft, embezzlement, and state looting, she made it public. With icy calm, she declared, quote, "The law must apply to everyone without exception," end quote. This phrase sounded noble when uttered in speeches, but when spoken by Aminata Toure, it became a threat because she meant it. The name Karim Wade was synonymous with political royalty. As the son of former President Abdoulaye Wade, he had been dubbed, quote, "the Minister of Sky and Earth," end quote, a sarcastic nod to the endless number of portfolios he controlled during his father's administration. He was a prince in all but name, a figure of untouchable privilege until he wasn't. In 2013, under Aminata Toure's leadership, the Senegalese government accused Karim Wade of illegally amassing over 240 million through shell companies and shadowy accounts across Europe and the Middle East. Toure didn't hesitate. She ordered his arrest. This explosive move sent the political class into a meltdown. Critics called it a witch hunt. Loyalists called vendetta. And international observers leaned in. But Aminata held her ground. With every camera trained on her, she stood firm. She said, "Justice in Senegal will not be selective. This is about principle, not politics." Senegal's court for the repression of illicit enrichment was reactivated for the case. A dominant institution feared for its sweeping powers was suddenly breathing fire again, and behind it, a woman with no time for deals. However, her ultimate goal wasn't just to imprison a few wrongdoers. She wanted to eliminate the incentive for corruption altogether. That meant going deeper. She implemented civil service reforms, creating a system that works for the people. Toure believed that corruption didn't always stem from greed. It often originated from desperation. So she aimed to rebuild Senegal's public institutions from the ground up. She advocated for meritocracy in the civil service, attempting to dismantle the old patronage system where jobs were distributed like political favors. She pushed for the digitization of public records and service delivery so that bribes and backdoor deals could no longer hide behind paper trails. Transparency through technology was her vision. She promoted the idea of allowing citizens to report inefficiencies, delays, or outright corruption via hotlines and digital platforms. In short, she wanted the system to function so efficiently that people wouldn't feel the need to pay bribes to obtain a passport or a permit or other government-issued benefits. That's just not reform, that's resistance through efficiency. Having served as Minister of Justice, Toure understood better than anyone that no reform could endure without a judiciary that was free from political influence. She campaigned for independent judiciary councils. She aimed to shift the process of appointing and promoting judges away from the president's office and into independent councils. She implemented training programs for judges and lawyers. These programs focused on ethics, international standards, and procedural integrity. She instituted specialized anti-corruption courts. So rather than only addressing cases against high-profile individuals, these courts aim to expedite justice for everyday Senegalese citizens affected by petty corruption. Of course, these efforts made her a target. When one empowers the law to be independent, those who benefited from impunity suddenly sees such a person as a threat rather than a reformer. This was the case with Aminata, but she didn't flinch. She wasn't just building for the present, she was building for the future. But here's the catch that no one warned her about. And that is when you fight corruption in a system built by the corrupt, you eventually find yourself surrounded. Aminata Toure quickly realized her greatest obstacle wasn't just the accused, it was the establishment itself. Within the very cabinet she served, whispers grew louder. Power brokers who once smiled at her now gritted their teeth in meetings. She was labeled too aggressive, too ambitious, and too disruptive. Translation, she was doing her job. Even President Macky Sall, once her biggest supporter, began to flinch under pressure. Foreign governments, investment lobbyists, and all political patrons all had stakes in the old system. Torres' warpath threatened the entire ecosystem. By mid 2013, Aminata Toure had accomplished what few dared to try in post colonial Africa. She put powerful men behind bars. Karim Wade was convicted and sentenced to 6 years in prison for illicit enrichment. It was historic, polarizing, and defining of her tenure. Aminata served as Minister of Justice from 2012 to 2013, after which she was appointed Prime Minister on September 1, 2013. Just months later, despite her popularity with the public and her reputation as a reformer, Toure was abruptly dismissed from her role as Prime Minister after serving only 8 months. A record rise followed by a chilling fall. Some claimed it was due to her failure to win a key mayoral race, but insiders knew better. She had become a threat, not to the opposition, but to her own party. She had done too much, too fast, and too honestly. In Senegalese politics, that kind of righteousness doesn't always win elections. Most politicians, after such a public fall, would retreat, write a memoir, join a board, or disappear. Aminata Toure did none of that. She stayed. She criticized her party's drift, refused to endorse Macky Sall in his bid for a third term. She spoke openly against backroom politics and betrayal. Though her tenure as prime minister lasted less than a year, her impact resonated far beyond the marble halls of power. After her dismissal, women organizations across West Africa rallied behind her. Her appointment wasn't just a milestone, it was a mirror held up to a nation and a continent. Because in Aminata Toure, as in all the women leaders who came after colonialism, Africa didn't just see a woman in power. It saw a return to something ancient before colonial rule, before imported patriarchy, before diversity hiring became Western talking points. Africa had its own warrior queens, its own female generals, its own stories of power that wore a woman's face. Aminata Toure wasn't an exception, she was a continuation. The world cannot lecture us on democracy while turning a blind eye to the suppression of dissent in countries they fund. This was her statement, diplomatic but never docile. In a global system that often tokenizes African voices, giving them 5 minute slots to speak on panels they didn't design, Aminata hijacked the microphone. She didn't just speak for Africa, she spoke as Africa, complex, uncompromising, and bold. Whether in New York, Nairobi, or Dakar, she was never just representing herself. She carried centuries of silent wisdom. That was Aminata Toure. If you found this story powerful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Which other lost queens of African history do you want to see next? Let's uncover them together.